Today, I wanted to talk about marriage, but I use the word quantitative because I really wanted to emphasize a certain level of value that is provided by men that normally is somewhat overlooked by both society and by women at large. So, what are the benefits of marriage? I was given this significant thought when I was putting together my notes for this show. And many times, from a man's perspective, when a man thinks about marriage, he's thinking about the woman he wants to spend his life with, the children that he will have, and the overall family and the benefit that that will offer him, both his immediate family and his extended family through his bride. But I wanted to examine this from a different perspective that looks at what are the quantitative value that a man would bring to a relationship of a marriage. And in short, the quantitative value simply means something that can be described or measured in quantity, not something that is more like a feeling or an idea that can't be seen, feel, or touch more or less by your five senses, right? Now, obviously, there are qualitative aspects to a marriage as well. And men do bring qualitative aspects to a marriage. But that's usually something where the woman will add quality to the overall life and how well it is enjoyed between both the man and the woman. But before that can actually be done, before the qualitative aspect can be appreciated, the quantitative aspect must first be laid. Those foundations must be in place. And the stronger and the better those foundations are, the more benefits to the marriage, and potentially there are more longer lasting, higher quality of overall life experience that all parties can enjoy. As I was doing my review, I came across many different websites that provided some background information. Some gave me as little as 14 different benefits that can be of value to a marriage. Others gave me up to, I think, 28 in general. But I'll focus on more or less the top 5 that I saw primarily in all of my searches. And most of it dealt with several things: tax, insurance, IRAs, or retirement account, individual retirement accounts, the benefits of that, the overall health benefits, and the companionship aspect. So those were the 5 main categories. And in general, most of the data, the information was surrounding the financial benefits of a marriage that can be accrued over time. Now, these 5 essential characteristics that I laid out that would be beneficial in a marriage are all vital, necessary, and for any long-term relationship would be of value. Definitely, as I stated earlier, children would be the reason for most men to get married. So that's included. And if you don't have sperm, well, I guess there are other ways to have children, right? But we'll go with the fact that everybody come with all working parts. But as I look further into developing this discussion and the conversation, and to provide a perspective from maybe what normally the man would provide, that is sort of like the undergirding support to a marriage that most people tend to overlook. And in my search, nowhere did I see any of it mentioned. So even society somewhat don't even count it. It's like somewhat of a given. Now, to me, that felt like it was like completely wrong, because a lot of the benefits that was cited outside of those financial benefits primarily went towards the female within the marriage. And even the financial benefits over time would accrue towards the female as well. They sort of brush lightly over many of the things that men would contribute to a marriage. And kind of gave the, how can I say, the impression that both men and women contributes to a marriage, at least from an economical standpoint, equally. And I think most of us would know that is not the reality. Maybe for a short term period of time, but usually not the long term for marriages that last some time. How do we know that? We know that because there's a thriving child support court and alimony court that exists. And the one reason why that exists is to extract financial resources from men and transfer it to women. So if both men and women were in the marriage contributing equally, that really would not be the case, because their economics would probably be relatively equal. Now, don't get me wrong, I am not trying to in any way suggest or say, excuse me, that women do not contribute quantitatively to a marriage. But by and large, that is really a man's domain. Historically, traditionally, or however else you might want to quantify it, that has been the domain of men. And even currently, and potentially in the future, it will continue to be so. But for whatever reasons in my searches, that was conveniently left out. And no emphasis was associated with how men contributes to a marriage. What really helped to lay the foundation for long-term living? Saj living in a fairy tale. What is this? I'm living in a fairy tale. Okay, I'll get to that. We'll see how fairy tale-ish or reality-ish this discussion will develop. I want to really have this conversation so that as it pertains to marriage, I want to look at it from what we have come to know in this space over the past year or two. No thanks to Kevin Samuels, fully credited, high value men or men with value. I want to use that as a benchmark for this conversation. And what I mean by that is that I don't want us to focus on the extremes at either end, right? The bum, the shiftless guy, or the guy that, you know, abuses his wife and his children, the drunk, the Pookie and Ray Ray are Chads, men of poor character, or in general, men who normally are not interested or marriage minded and do not have either the ability, the desire, or the will to enter into a marriage or to provide within a marriage. I'd like to build this conversation basically from a basic understanding that two people who have met, entered into a relationship, looking to plan a future together, decide that they want to do so. They're both of good character. We're not talking about converting 304s into housewives and none of that. That's a different conversation. And I'm sure you guys have had quite a bit. I want to focus on two normal, good quality people who are looking at life in a very similar way and want similar outcomes, I should say. Let's just say someone who is a good guy who is successful. He has general good character. He works hard for a living and he has begun to thrive for all his efforts. I'd like to use that as a baseline for this conversation. So what I'd like to do is first, let's see how we can deconstruct a man's perspective and his contributions as it pertains to marriage and what those responsibilities usually look like from the man's eye, how that translates into direct benefits to both the women and the children of the family. But most of the times, or at least some of those times, they're perceived as minimal or what you're supposed to do or that's your job, which most times gets discounted, and the true value of how men actually contribute to marriage that make it a worthwhile endeavor for both men and women tend to be belittled. So a man's contribution to marriage, and I'm going to first start out with an analogy to kind of lay the groundwork. And then, because I come from a numbers life, financials, financial service, and I look at things in a quantitative way, I'll put some numbers together and we'll have that discussion so you guys can really see what that looked like. But first, I'd like to use an analogy to first lay out this conversation, and then we can talk about it after. A man's contribution to a marriage, I have assessed it down to electricity. Electricity's contribution or requirement to modern society is almost, as it pertains to most people's thinking and day-to-day life, is almost unnoticeable. People really don't think about it. They use it, but with the expectations that it's always supposed to be there, i.e., that it works. You walk into a room, you flip the switch, it illuminates. You get into your car, you flip the switch, it starts. So I want to use that as the basis to this discussion so we can examine electricity, things that apply to real life, and then we can talk about the man, how he may apply to real life. Like I said, electricity is almost unnoticeable until one thing happens when it goes out. Without it, we're back to the future, literally. Why do I say that? Without electricity, what happens? Public transportation, trains, buses, airlines comes to a halt. Communication, as we know it, email, post office, social media, done. Food, most people don't grow food. So that means we deal with logistics. Food is grown all around the world, shipped in from different places. That'll affect overall global transportation cargo. So we're dealing with food, medicine, clothing. And I think 2 years ago, we got an understanding of how that affects our life in America and in other places when we were dealing with the PPEs, right? Just getting a mask for your face. If it didn't come from China, well, you was shit out of luck because they were the one that had the contracts and the infrastructure, i.e., the factories, to pump them out. Now, yes, there were smaller providers here and there, but to produce 100 million, 200 million, and do it in a short enough time to then deliver it, not a reality. How long do we think our gas tank would stay full? How long do you think the power plants can keep oil or whatever it is that they use to run their turbines, diesel fuel or whatever to keep the lights on in society? After 30 to 60 days, what would that really look like? Horses, cows, and carriages. That'll be your transportation. Candles, wood, and fire would be your light and heat. I mean, what I'm saying is our society, though it's not at the front of our mind, it's extremely fragile. And it's fragile with one simple resource. Why do you think the United States makes such a point in having such a large military station around the world in the Middle East, where we would say, what the hell? Why are they spending all that money to be over there when they could be using that money to build infrastructure in the United States, help people do better, build more jobs, whatnot? Because they know one thing. If them Arabs turn off them oil faucets and they start shipping that oil somewhere else in large quantities, the lights go out. Tyranny starts. Society would break down real fast. Now, I'm using this analogy to kind of put people in the proper perspective. How something that is valuable, that provides the basis for day-to-day life, that once it's not there, how quickly life can start to fall apart. Why am I saying this? And why over the past few years, even after MGTOW and so forth, which has been going on for at least a decade or more, started you know, with our brothers from another mother. But why is marriages such a big conversation in this space? And why did Kevin Samuels focus on it so much? At first, I really didn't get it. I mean, I did and I didn't. But because I'm into politics and finance and a lot of those things, I'm starting to see other threads that are coming unloose, that are associative. There are many things that are associated with marriage. And I see a couple of people dropping some real gems in the chat. Without marriage, over time, what we begin to see is a no man's land. Because men, as we and they continue to walk away from marriage, the society will slowly begin to degenerate. It will start to fall apart. The men who have the skills, when they die, if they didn't train anyone for those skills, you'll lose it. So the guys that runs the boilers, the infrastructure, that drill for oil, the people who build skyscrapers, the electricians, HVACs, airplane, engine, because men are survivalists and because men don't need a lot to survive, they just need what makes them comfortable. It's like Better Bachelor. I don't know which of you guys may watch Better Bachelor, but I watch him sometime because there's a lot of value in what he says and the way he has started to make changes in his life. His father recently died. He's cut back on his lifestyle. He sold his house. He bought a piece of land. He's building a log cabin. He recustomed his van, which he did primarily by himself. He's minimalizing his life without a woman. And if he wants sex, the society is transforming where sex can easily be purchased. No big deal. So my point is, as men start to pull back because they don't see the value in life, because women say, hey, I don't need you. You don't provide nothing I need anyway. Men are like, okay, cool. It's slowly becoming an every man for himself society, both from the male perspective and the female perspective. Now, I don't think governments are really aware of this because we know governments, they're like battleships, right? They turn very slow. They're big decision makers, and little things they don't pay too much attention to, and they give less and less value to people who are considered, the sheeps of society, broke, or don't really have enough influence to get their attention. Now, governments are aware of the reproduction issue and the replacement of enough people in the society, so they're started to take steps to address that. Last month in June, we saw the Roe v. Wade reversal. In some of the countries, they're paying men to get married and giving them tax breaks over a period of time. China is investing in men going to Singapore, Indonesia, and different parts of Asia, Southeast Asia, to buy wives. So countries do recognize that aspect, and they're taking steps to try to force men to come back to the table. But in the West is moving headlong. Okay, my mic sound like I'm outside. Let me see, is it better now? If it's better, give me a thumbs up, guys, so I can see. I just saw that comment by, what's that, Am Decorations? Give me a thumbs up, guys, to let me know if my mic is sounding better. All right, cool. Appreciate it. Okay, so as I was saying, most governments, they see the population issue. They don't really see the broader aspect of the crumbling of society because they're making a whole different plan. But before I get off track, let me kind of get to the crux of what I want to talk about. Now, we've recently noticed that not only did Roe v. Wade come down, but several states are starting to make laws to make men pay for child support at conception. These are like draconian steps to force men, because men know, the lawmakers who are making these laws, men know how what men react to. Men react to force. So they're trying to force men or to break men to come back in to society. But at the same time, men also know that we always have two choices. We can capitulate or we can walk away. And more men are starting to walk away. Now that I've kind of laid that out for you, let me say this. I've did some calculations, and I did the calculations. Obviously, there are many things that I'm probably going to miss that I didn't include. And I'm sure some of you will bring it to my attention as you come up on the panel. JR, if you didn't drop the link yet, you can do so. I'd like brothers and or sisters, to come into the back chat so we can have this conversation. But I used 250,000 as a baseline income to be able to show quantitative value from a man's perspective in a marriage. Because there are some basic things that life consists of today that it didn't consist of 100 years ago or more. So I wanted to kind of lay out where it all starts, because without the basics for life, you're living in poverty or you're living below poverty, right? If you have problems feeding yourself on a daily basis, having a place to live on a daily basis, having clothes, reasonably good clothes on your back on a daily basis, you're in poverty or you're below poverty. That's how society looks at you. And bottom line is, that's how you live in. So, from a food perspective, and I'm going to deal with it as individuals as we stand right now. If you spend $50 a day on food, that's lunch, breakfast, dinner. And that's, let's say, for two people. 365 days, that's $18,250. Shelter, a mortgage. If you're paying $2,500 a month on your mortgage, that's 30 grand a year. Property tax, insurance, I made it very small, $200. That's $2,400 a month. Medical insurance, if you get sick, $350 a month. That's 4 grand a year. Family insurance, that's death policy. If you die, whoever survives you get a check, right? So that's 3,600 a year, 300 a month. And I'm using low numbers. I'm not using New York numbers. I'm using low numbers on an average. Clothing. Let's say you spend 500 bucks a month on clothes. That's 6 grand a year. The average person probably spends a lot more than that. Car. More than likely, if it's two people, you're going to have two cars. So on average, you might be looking at 450, 500 bucks a month on a car note. So I made it a grand even. That's 12 grand a year. Transportation, using $5 as gas, 22-gallon gas tank. That's $110 a week, 440 a month. That's 5,000 a year. Travel, including vacations, Christmas, the holidays, 4th of July, whatever you do, short trips, small trips, long trips. 5 grand for the year. Overall entertainment, going out. Let's say you go out once a month, you spend 500 bucks, you and your lady. That's 12 grand a year. Jewelry. Now we know jewelry is expensive, but let's say $3,000 a year in jewelry. Now I know most ladies will laugh at that number. Property maintenance, that's your lawn, roof, painting, electricity, plumbing. Let's say 5 grand every 2 to 3 years. Replacement for new cars. Most people today, Americans, replace their cars every 3 years or so. Some sooner, some later. But the average is around 3 years. Long-term resources, 401ks, IRAs, stock investment, cryptos. I didn't put a number on that because it depends on your income, how you would invest in that. But I would say most guys making about $250 a year, he's going to put at least 8% of his income into his 401k or an IRA. He's probably going to be investing about 15 to 18, maybe 20% between stocks and crypto. But I didn't qualify that. Now you also deal with social respect. Social respect or community respect is something that really benefits the woman in a marriage that she gets from who her husband is and what he does. Okay. Walk by faith, she said flexing. Okay. It allows you some level of flexing as well. Absolutely. That's flexing currency. Inheritance and legacy. Legacy, obviously, are children, but you deal with investments, properties, stocks and bonds, insurance policies. All those things go towards a woman in the long-term view of a family. Now, out of those things that I listed, and I'm sure there are other things that you guys can hit me to, I selected 6 things that are primal for life and survival. Food, shelter, which is your mortgage, property insurance, which you got to have if you have a mortgage, medical insurance, which you will need if you get sick. Some people, their jobs provide a portion of that cost. Family insurance, which, like as I said, death policy, and clothing. I qualified those numbers based on 2 people getting married where the woman's age is 25 and the man's age is between 32 and 35. A mortgage is 30 years and everything else to retirement, I qualified it at 40 years. So food, based on going out to eat, $50 a day, or cost of living, eating food, $50 a day, was $730,000. Your mortgage, that was $900,000. Property insurance, 72 grand. Medical insurance, 168,000. Family insurance, that's debt policy, $300 a year, maybe $500,000 policy, or $1 million policy, depending on how young you started the policy. Clothing, 250,000. Now, all of these numbers, I'm sure, or many of them, were very low for how people spend and live today, depending on which coast, city, or state you live in. But overall, that lifetime cost on those 6 things that I calculated is $2.264 million. That's $2,264,000. That's a 40-year life from a woman getting married at 25 to the age of 65. Now we know that most women live longer than men, and their life continue for possibly another 20 years. So another 20 years would more than likely add significant value as well. But let's say the house would be paid off, so you'd only be stuck with the insurance and so forth. Medical would still be there. Food, clothing, all those things would still be there. Now, based on these numbers, from a man and a woman to both see in this conversation, I want you guys to really make an assessment. Number one, the amount of money we spend living apart, living separate lives, particularly when both the man and the woman work. But for a man that makes 250,000, let's say he wants his wife to raise his children, and she's of similar mind. She might work part-time here or there. You know, you can do stuff today, work at home, work from, if you have technical skills, you can do that. You can add to the pot. But I think this tends to bring home what the value really is that a man contributes just from a financial standpoint in a marriage. Now, if you make less, 100 grand, whatever, then just your lifestyle is lesser. You may not own a home, you may rent a home. You may not have 2 cars, you may just have 1. You may take public transportation if you're in a city where that's available, like New York. So there are adjustments based on where you would live. But the bottom line is, a man that is of value brings a significant worth to a marriage and a life. We're talking 2 million plus. And I didn't factor in private school. I didn't factor in tuition. I didn't factor in clothes for children. I didn't factor in university and the cost for those costs. I didn't factor in cars and vacation for a big family. I just kept it at bare bones. And I think this is why when Kevin said many women will die alone, is because women are not very good at long-term calculations and looking at how things are quantified and how where you start can change the outcome of where you end up 40 years later. And I think from a man's perspective, if you are a man that is on your way, if you're making 100, 150,000, if you're in tech and you know in the next few years, 3 to 5 years, you could eclipse 250,000 or higher, the ball's in your court. You call the shots. You make the choice. And I think more and more women are starting to realize that in general, feminism have dealt them a bad card.